It's just gone 7 o'clock in South Africa. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 4th episode of the Lift as We Rise webinar series from a grey and wintry Port Elizabeth, South Africa. Whether you are listening to the live event this evening or to the recording, it is always great to share our conversations with you. We value your time and also your input. So let your voice and thoughts be heard. Use the chat box or leave a comment if you're watching this on the YouTube channel. Lift as We Rise is a core offering of the StratConnect service stream. Through StratConnect, we provide a digital platform to connect thriving businesses with their peers and stakeholders for brand promotion, to share expertise, and to build sustainable organizations. For more information on StratConnect and StratAstute Consulting's other service streams, log on to www.stratastute.co.za, and who knows, maybe we could be speaking about your business or your Build Better purpose in a 2021 webinar. So tonight's talk is one that I believe will lift the lid on mental health, a topic that is often met with some level of awkwardness. Fortunately, this digital platform gives you a safe space to lean in and listen to the experts as I speak to them about mental health, work, and wellness to thrive. So why are we discussing this topic on what is essentially a business webinar? Well, let me share the context before I introduce you to our panel. An estimated 400 million people worldwide suffer from mental or neurological disorders or from psychosocial problems. Mental Health Day is celebrated on 10 October annually. In what was a decisive forward-thinking move, the South African Department of Health confirmed its commitment to mental health when it declared October to be Mental Health Awareness Month in South Africa. It was declared with the objective of not only educating the public about mental health, but also to reduce the stigma and discrimination that people with mental illnesses are often subjected to. Internationally, the World Health Organization expects that mental health and psychological support will substantially increase in the coming months and years. In response, the World Economic Forum and world leaders have committed to addressing the risks of mental health and to become more intentional about finding sources of funding for mental health programs at the national and at the international levels. These efforts are being led by no other than Prince William, as well as the CEO of HSBC, John Flint, amongst others. Global statistics show that about 49% of entrepreneurs suffer from at least one form of mental health during their lifetimes. A recent study by the University of San Francisco's researcher, Michael Freeman, stated that entrepreneurs are trained to ignore the qualitative needs of their well-being, which is measured by authentic relationships, overall life satisfaction, and happiness. Instead, they are driven by the no pain, no gain theory, and current performance models measure success in quantitative returns, return on investment, and in profit terms. Freeman's research further went on to show that founders of startup businesses are, listen to this, twice as likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to suffer from ADHD, 3 times more likely to suffer from bipolar disorder, twice as likely to have a psychiatric hospitalization, and twice as likely to have suicidal thoughts. In our daily lives, which have been significantly altered over the past 11 months, school pupils, employees, those facing starvation or fighting the pandemic on the front lines, 2020 has raised concerns around compromised mental health and wellness. In an increasingly digitized, yet emotionally disconnected society, humans need human contact. So what is this signal for the future health and sustainability of our cities, of our societies, and our businesses? I'm pleased to introduce you to our 2 panelists today. First up, we have Tracy Feinstein. Tracy is with the South African Drug and Anxiety Group. She's a senior counselor, resilience, and mental wellness coach there. Through her consulting work, Tracy also works with organizations and businesses offering coaching, facilitation, and training. Hi, Tracy.
Good evening, and thank you for having us this evening. And the invitation is so well appreciated. Thanks, Roshni.
Lovely, Tracy. And secondly, we have Paddy Cloete, who's a clinical psychologist, a social worker, and an experienced endurance athlete. Despite Paddy's long and committed working hours supporting her patients, Paddy has completed every single Ironman event in South Africa, including the half Ironman, the full Ironman, and the world champs hosted in our country. To me, Paddy represents a purpose-driven female professional who I have personally observed with immense admiration for more than a decade. Paddy, great to have you on the talk show with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's a little bit overstated, but it's lovely to be here.
All good people are humble, Paddy. So great to speak with you and Tracy. And to be honest, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So I think let's get straight into it. Just to start off, Tracy and Paddy, tell us a bit about yourselves as people and as practicing professionals. And also, what has your personal experience been of 2020? Should we start with Paddy?
Yeah, as you said, as a professional, like you said, there's not much more I can tell you. My daily life consists out of therapy and in private practice as a psychologist. I'm passionate about wellness in general because I don't believe, I think there's always a way. People will always endure. They'll always get to the other side. So, we decide what our story is in the end. We don't decide where we start, but we definitely decide where we end up in terms of we can take control. So that's what my daily life is about, is working with people to make the best of their situation. And in my private life, I do a bit of cycling, running, and swimming.
Yes, just a little bit, Paddy, starting at 4:30 in the morning. Tracy, how about yourself?
Yes, thanks. So I would like to say probably I am a mom, first of all. I have teenage boys, well, teenage young adults. I mean, they would hate to hear me say that. 20, I think 25 and 27 or 28. I'm clearly losing track of the ages. So I have, I'm blessed to still have my family as a very integral part of my life. I am a businesswoman. I run my own business. I very much in the coaching and the corporate space, where I do a lot of training around education on mental health and wellness. I have an immense passion for SADAG, which is the organization that I represent this evening. And I think there was just a little slip of the tongue when we started. So SADAG is the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And it's an organization that I volunteer with. It has been going for about 27 years. And I've been with them for the better part of 7 or 8 years. And yes, I really do now consider myself as a mental health practitioner, in that I am able to package my experience, my offering, and my professional business acumen into a space that gives people tools and techniques to really help them, particularly in coping in the workplace environment. So I'm very often the one that says you need to go and see somebody like Paddy and really encourage them to get the support that they probably desperately need.
So just before we went live, and to bring our listeners into a little bit about what we were chatting about, Paddy, you started off as a social worker, and Tracy, very interestingly, you shared with us that you started off in financial services. Do you maybe want to give us a quick overview from each of you of where you started and how the journey's been to where you are today, and what were the trigger points that led you to where you are? Let's start with Paddy.
So initially I wanted to, I only wanted, as long as I can remember, as long as I've been alive, I wanted to be a social worker. Watch programs like movies like Annie, and thought, wanted to have an orphanage and look after kids, but always wanted to be a social worker, finished my master's in social work and worked in non-governmental organizations. Most of my work was with FAMSA, Family Marital Society of South Africa. A lot of gender-based violence was my primary focus at that time. Then I went on to the university where I lectured for a period of time. And I also ran a community outreach program and continued to study. Then eventually I was working in the psychology clinic at the university, also working at a day clinic, a psychiatric day clinic. And then eventually I went into private practice where I literally work mostly with trauma but the trauma is the beginning, that's not the end, how to make the most of our life. Yeah.
Thanks, Paddy. Tracy, can we hear your story?
Yes. So I too, from a little child, knew what I wanted to be, and that was actually to be a teacher. And when I finished my school career, I then, after traveling for a year and going overseas, I came back and I enrolled to be a teacher. But as youngsters do have, as young adolescents, the travel bug had bitten, and I wanted to go back overseas. And I remember the day as clear as daylight. My dad told me, well, if you wish to travel, you're going to have to earn your money. And so I started in those days, it was the Building Society, which is now a bank. And I thought I was going to make money, spend a year there, and then go and travel. That never happened. I stayed with that bank financial institution for 20 years, and I then moved out of the workspace. And it was through reflection recently where I identified that I myself have experienced significant life-changing events, being divorced, the loss of my husband, challenges with young children growing up, that I realized that I had a unique connection to really be able to want to continue to help people. And so embarked on my journey, and I never knew about the organization of SADAG, and I really have found a very comforting, happy space there, because I know in very practical ways I'm able to guide people as to how they can get support, and that they should seek support for these mental well-being as soon as they've experienced a traumatic event. And yeah, that's really been my journey in terms of where I am today, and what brings me here to be able to come on this platform and be able to share valuable information to the listeners.
Thanks, Tracy. That's actually a great leader to, the second question. And so when the South African Department of Health announced Mental Health Awareness Month last month, they did that on the basis that mental health problems are the result of what they say is a complex interplay between biological, psychological, social, and environmental factors. They say there's an increasing evidence that both the content and the context of work can play a role in the development of mental health problems in the workspace. I'd like to add that let's go beyond the workspace, because our reality has become extremely constrained in 2020. Tracy, tell us more about the work of the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and also the state of awareness regarding mental health in South Africa today.
Thank you. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, South African Depression and Anxiety Group, commonly known as SADAG, is a non-profit organization founded by the founder, Zane Wilson, who is still an integral part of the day-to-day operations. It is an organization been going for 27 years now. The board members are all psychiatrists and psychologists with true passion for the common mental health or the mental wellness and understanding mental space. We really are advocates for getting the word out and trying to, number one, dispel the stigma, break the myth, and get people to realize that as much as you go out and you seek advice from a doctor, if you feel like you're getting a cold and you're getting sick, as quickly do you need to recognize your state of mental wellness or traumatic experience triggers you to experience mental health issues. And therefore you tip into a state of very often of anxiety. In the workplace, I just wanted to bring up quickly, and you know, in your opening conversation, your introductory talk, you mentioned quite a few very relevant statistics, and a lot of them were international statistics. In South Africa, we're really looking at 1 in 3 suffering a mental illness at any given point in life. And there was research also done during this lockdown experience by a South African university in partnership with a research company. And it has been determined, and the statistics and the research information has been released, but 49% of employees are suffering with a mental illness, more importantly, depression in the workplace. And I think a little bit later, we will talk about what is the impact in the workplace of suffering with a mental illness. And so it really makes no difference. In fact, it makes more of a difference right now, because we were all put into such an exponential change environment. Overnight, we literally had to move from our safe place, our happy place, a different workplace, and we had to suddenly start working from home. And we'll talk about that in the evening, because there's been significant amounts of challenges that we've all had to face. So I think it's a really important topic that your company has brought to the platform. And we've got to continue to talk about it, not only daily, weekly, monthly, or once a year when it's World Mental Health Month. The more we can discuss these things and open the conversation, I think people begin to feel a lot more comfortable to ask the questions and then seek help.
So Tracy, help us understand then, how does the SADAG enable this, and how do its support structures work? How is the organization funded?
Right. So as an NGO, of course, we're constantly seeking funding, but we have a lot of corporates who certainly do come to the party. We've had a lot of partners who have been able to fund us over the years and do. A lot of those are the pharmaceuticals companies who are supplying a lot of the medication required in mental health. Okay, so how do we help people? Our call to fame at the moment is very much our call center. And at the moment, I think we are sitting with in excess of 22, probably 26 toll-free helplines, which are available 24/7, 365. So through various social media platforms, people have access to those numbers. They can go on our website. Not only are there access to the toll-free numbers, but there's a wealth of information. And so traditionally, a caller would phone any time of the day or night, doesn't matter where they are, and they will get to speak to a counsellor. That counsellor is trained to give them containment counselling and refer them for the relevant help. We run support groups across the country, and we continually, on a day-to-day basis, play an integral part in trying to spread the awareness. We've even, over the years, through the help of our board members, actually trained sangomas. So we try and reach the most rural places so that even those people feel comfortable and get access to information. And we've got different platforms daily. We utilize social media platforms like webinars, Zoom training, Facebook, Instagram, constantly to create awareness and get the word out. But we do not diagnose. We cannot do that over the phone, but we certainly are able to connect with the individual, and through our training of our counselors, give them appropriate relevant support and guidance as to where they can get quick access to help.
Thanks for that overview, Tracy. So you've been going for 27 years. You were saying to us earlier that your call rate's gone up from 600 to 800 a day to 1,200 to 1,500 a day of volunteer service where professionals are putting their hands up. Well, yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for your service. And I'm sure that it's going to become a lot more required as our awareness in our country grows. Yes. So, you know, when I was getting on this journey of understanding more about mental health, and I'll get into some background on that a bit later, I found that countries like the UK seem a lot more advanced in terms of how they've positioned mental health and how it's talked about in the workplace, and also the response mechanisms that they've already conceptualized, but are both around mental health awareness, wellness, and then a third aspect that's gaining traction is neurodiversity, but that's a subject for another day. Mm-hmm. The current president of the Federation of World Mental Health, Dr. Ingrid Daniels, I had the pleasure of speaking with her last week. She's in fact a South African, I'm proud to say. So, you know, South Africa's response to mental health on that basis most certainly has an influence. Let's bring Paddy into this conversation. So if we're looking at an overview of emerging trends in mental health issues around 2020, how are these emerging issues any different to what you've experienced previously in your practice? Or are there similar issues coming to the surface, but now they're actually being diagnosed? We can talk about the South African context, and Paddy, you also deal with international clients, so let's hear about that too.
Roshni, I think, you know, the lockdown has created the impression that everything is about lockdown, but people's lives have continued. It's just become more complex to access your resources. I mean, there was literally people who've had traumas, like people were dying from cancer, people were dying in car accidents, your gender-based violence, all those things were still happening. But what was happening is that your access to resources were limited. Your options were limited. So a lot of people were sitting in a situation that even those that would generally be able to deal with tough situations were struggling because they weren't able to access what their normal resources would be. A simple thing like people couldn't go outside initially in level 5. So you couldn't go outside, you couldn't go and exercise, you couldn't experience nature. And so for me, the main thing that I saw the trends is that all of a sudden, that which usually worked for people in terms of their coping mechanisms were all of a sudden not accessible. And the normal thing about people, for example, I work with a lot of terminal people, and all of a sudden, your normal trends were, my friend is sick, I'm going to go over and visit her and take her something. So the other side was also, your people were going through trauma, but their resources didn't know how to support them because you weren't allowed to go outside. You weren't allowed to support. And I think that was the struggle for a lot of people. Over time, people have built, I like to talk about, you've got a toolbox, and the more tools you have in the toolbox, the better you cope with life. And people had to develop access to those. You know, a lot of people, for example, older people were deprived of, they don't know how to operate on technology. So a lot of them felt very excluded. If I think about level 5, I only saw people online. And some people were incredibly anxious about that. So I would take photographs and send them, okay, this is what the keys look like. And they eventually came online. But a very interesting trend I found is teenagers did not want to do therapy online. Those that were most technology savvy, they insisted on seeing me in person. Teenagers don't want to do online therapy, which is quite
really, that is actually very interesting around the future scenarios that the futurists are putting in front of us. And are those just kind of so painted with one point of view, or are they taking the humanistic approach, which I think, Paddy, you're bringing out? You raised an important point about the sense of inclusion versus exclusion. In your example, you were speaking about technology as an enabler. How does this speak to the feeling and the sense of belonging when it comes to mental health? So you may have been disconnected physically and, let's say, socially this year, but the principle of sense of belonging plays a huge role in organizations, in businesses, in society. And what is the status of that within a country like South Africa, where we are still battling with the integrational aspects within our society? Tracy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think what I find, I've got two responses to this. First of all, because I was so involved with the day-to-day counseling from the moment that lockdown started, and where we are now 6-7 months later, right in the beginning, I noticed the heightened levels of anxiety. Okay. But the anxiety trigger was actually about relationships, okay? And I remember in the early days that so many of the calls and the counseling that we were trying to help people with were, how do they manage relationships? And it was quite an interesting dynamic. And I think, Paddy, you would also enjoy this. So the people that you love the most, okay, let's say a traditional family unit, you do love your parents, you love your partner, and you maybe have 1 or 2 children. These are the people that you love the most. And we like to spend time with the people that we love the most. But now, all of a sudden, because of lockdown, they were placed under one roof 24/7, okay, with no breathing space. And as you say, not even go outside, out of the gate, okay? The best you could do was explore your garden. And for a lot of people, they didn't even have that space, all right? So the nearest and the dearest and the people you love the most were causing a level of anxiety because you actually couldn't handle them. And so I think it's opened a whole different dynamic of how we look at relationships and how successful relationships are meant to be. That very often husband and wives, they separate and they go their own way. They have their own world. They have their own space. And all of this was taken away during lockdown because now we had to try and survive and thrive in the remote environment. So that for me was quite a significant change that I saw happen in the early days. The anxiety levels have now moved past anxiety. Yes, they're still there. It's moved over to depression. And this has been impacted by the fact that a lot of people have lost loved ones. They haven't had the chance to grieve. They never had the chance to say goodbye because family members couldn't visit hospital. Okay. We then have had people lose jobs. So financial implications have been significant. Children, the challenge of facing the fact that now children have had their entire social environment, their school friends ripped away from them, has impacted astronomically. The amount of calls that we are receiving and having to guide children how to manage their lives is really been something like we've never seen before. And so there's been the financial remuneration, which has been impacted on. And the moment people lose their jobs, their lack of purpose falls away. And that has significant effect on your mental health. We've also seen that people suddenly had to learn to manage loved ones who may have been actually managing chronic mental illnesses like bipolar, schizophrenia, and OCD. And previously, that was not their responsibility because those family members left work, left the day at home, and went off to work. So there's been such a culmination of triggers that have led us to where we are today. And I think the good thing and what I can see emerging out of this change of environment, particularly in the workplace, and Roshni, this brings me back to your initial question, is that I think it's a good thing that these heightened levels of anxiety have manifested. What it's done for corporates and the workplace environment is that it is challenging businesses to say, if you have a mission statement, if you have a value proposition which says we trust, we support our employees, we'll go the extra mile to help our employees. Okay, now is the time that they are going to have to put tools, practices, and techniques in place so that we can actually see employees, staff members come forward and say, I'm not managing, and feel safe in that place. We don't have enough medical interventions, psychologists, psychiatrists, and even social workers across the country to actually support the massive pandemic that we are seeing in terms of mental health being impacted on by employees and staff members having to work remotely from home and juggle their challenges.
Tracy, thank you for that, because, hence I do feel that the decision that the Department of Health made in South Africa to declare the whole of October Mental Health Awareness Month is really quite a forward-thinking one. And given that the news headlines were mentioning things like gender-based violence, these types of things were coming to the surface via the media. So as a society, I think we've really acknowledged that this is an issue, and now it's up to the corporates and the individuals in society to say, how can we aid, support, but also realize that each of us at some point in our lives or within the year will experience some form of, I can't say mental illness, let's call it a mental challenge. So then just to unpack what Tracy was saying from a clinical perspective, Paddy, we've mentioned a couple of words which we cannot take for granted that people all understand them. So what are the different types of mental illnesses, and how would we go about identifying each one of them?
Sorry, I launched in there without unmuting myself. I think the first thing is always, we need to first validate people's experience, that you need to start with where you are at. So I would always, people need to, at the moment, I think the best way to look at it is if you think of a car, when it's not working, a red light goes on. And as human beings, we have red lights too. And if you ignore the red light, it's just like a car. It will eventually stop. I often say to people, that's part of our journey in life. Get to know your red lights. Because for some people, a level of elevated anxiety, worry is normal. If you think of the bell curve, a certain level of alertness is required for us to perform. But that is different for every individual. So once we get to know our red lights, you need to start realizing you don't ever want to get to a place where you have your whole dashboard full of red lights, because your car will stop. So if you think you're in trouble, that's already a red light, because you don't ask yourself, am I okay, unless you're not okay. Then you need to start saying, okay, what is my normal? Am I deviating from how I usually cope? Am I sleeping more? Am I eating more? Am I doing things that is unusual for me? Those are already red lights. You may not meet a criteria in terms of a diagnosis, but you're deviating from what works for you. If it was a conscious decision, maybe if you're exercising more, that might have been a conscious decision. But any change from your norm is something you need to be aware of. Then if that starts impacting on your daily functioning, like Tracy was saying, if your relationship was suffering, if your performance at work is suffering, if your social networks, you're getting pushback from them, that's when we start saying that's impacting on your daily, that's when we are concerned. That's when you need to start saying, maybe I'm not functioning at my optimal well-being. You don't have to have a diagnosis to start working on yourself. You actually should start working on yourself when your red light starts flashing. Because once you hit the diagnosis phase, then what's happened is your cars come to a standstill. Some of us, unfortunately, when we were initially talking before everyone joined us, Tracy was saying, unfortunately, some of us have to realize there's a genetic predisposition to some mental challenges we have. It's not a sense of failure if you're struggling. It's the fact that is affirmation that you be a human being. No one is on a tar road going downhill all the time. There's uphills, there's potholes, South African roads are a reflection of life in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Paddy, thanks for that. We live in a society, not only in South Africa, where being vulnerable, particularly in the workplace, can be a limiting factor. And like I was saying earlier, these types of conversations start off being awkward. That's why even if you saw a red light within your own behavior, you might be very hesitant to even mention it to someone very close to you. How, Paddy, do you suggest to your clients that they overcome that inner resistance?
Roshni, my experience is that once people start talking, actually, that vulnerability, when you start with somebody that you trust, but my experience is the moment when you start actually saying real stuff, you speak to your own truth and say, I'm struggling, you often will find the rest of the people saying, oh, I'm not the only one. Because everyone struggles at certain times, but the fear is you're the only one. Until one person is brave enough to speak up, and then more and more people will start having those conversations. So I will often encourage, be real about it, because otherwise what happens is people internalize. They start saying, they have an internal conversation about, I can't talk about it because people are going to respond in a certain way. Then they start playing. I always say to them, the only one watching this series in your head. No one has that privilege. And now, once you've generated a story in your head, you're reacting to the world as if that is true. And one way of dealing with when you're struggling is, like Tracy said, put up your hand and actually say, I'm struggling. Because then we can deal with facts. If your workplace or your family environment is not able to cope or respond positively, then we deal with it. But let's relate to the world as if there's an expectation that people will rally around us, because often that is true. If it isn't true, then we handle that. But it's better to know the truth than to sit with the fear and that you don't know what's going to happen. So my encouragement is always, let's start talking about it. Let's start the conversation.
Thanks, Paddy. So, in the personal spaces I'm in and in the leadership circles I'm in, I try to create an environment for those around me, and certainly for myself, where you feel sufficiently safe and secure to have an opportunity to thrive. Because I think in the absence of that, you are really going to battle. So, Tracy, let's take Paddy's concept of red lights then into the workplace. And indicators in the workplace, and I'll read the 10 out to you that have been touted. They include workload, both excessive and insufficient work. And this might be an issue with a level of underemployment and unemployment in our country. Number 2, lack of participation and control in the workplace, i.e. feeling excluded or not being heard. Number 3, monotonous or unpleasant tasks, so you're not being stimulated. Number 4, role ambiguity or conflict, so you're really not sure what you're actually meant to be doing. Number 5, lack of recognition at work, inequity, poor interpersonal relationships, poor working conditions, poor leadership and communication, which is a passion area for me. And then number 10, conflicting home and work demands. And Tracy, when I spoke to you earlier this afternoon, I shared with you that in my experience of management and leadership, what I had to quickly acknowledge was that when the person comes into work at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, don't expect them to leave their whole being behind at the office door and come in as this kind of work person only. They bring in the whole of themselves into work. And often, they're not given a space to demonstrate that and work through it. So speak to us about, in South Africa, how do organizations manage and address mental health and wellness? What are the programs? And then futuristically, given what we know now after 2020, what should we be focusing on?
Okay, that's great. And I totally agree with you on that a statement of now more than ever before, we cannot have a person who comes to work and they used to look like this, behave like this, do like this. Work and life has always been integrated. Probably because we were working in an office versus your home was separate, it was a lot easier to manage. I think in the workplace environment now, where so many people are actually facing the challenge of having to work remotely. So in fact, their home is their work and their work is their home. Means that companies, and from a leadership and a management perspective, we are really challenged to actually put into practice so much of a better empathetic style of leadership to connect with our individuals. And we've got it, we really need to have what I like to call like a touch and a connect, or a cuddle corner, a care corner, where people can go and they can really tap into somebody and they can offload. When we are talking about mental illness in the workplace, and for this purpose of conversation right now, I'm really making reference to suffering, sort of like the typical anxiety and depression. I'm not at all mentioning the more chronic mental illnesses. But those, just by experiencing those and starting to recognize that red light, okay, I'm anxious. When we look at leadership training or staff development, this is when the crucial aspect of understanding themselves and giving them that level of responsibility becomes so important. Because the moment you can be in touch with, I'm not feeling okay, all right? As Paddy says, okay, the truth is the body will always trump. So whatever is going on in here, and I always say to the people, our head is connected to our body. Okay, the two do work, not always in sync, and that's part of the problem. But the body will trump. And so if you are anxious, okay, eventually, if you do not manage that anxiety, for some people, it will manifest in a panic attack. For some people who are battling a state of lethargic, low, depressed, really feeling in a dark hole, the real manifestation, how it plays up as work, is that they will be not able to concentrate. They will lose attention. Their memory loss will go. They will attend a Zoom meeting with the rest of their colleagues. And by the time the meeting finishes, they're looking and they're thinking, what did I have to do? So management companies now have a massive responsibility to really equip the staff with tools and techniques that are really relevant to their day-to-day functioning, to reinforce things like time management, planning, taking a break, getting exercise is vitally important to their mental well-being. What I want to just say and pick up on the earlier comments that Paddy said, and it was so part of distilling this myth and the stigma about not understanding mental health is that it's not simple. We cannot walk into a doctor or even see a psychiatrist and think that they're going to take a blood test or do a urine test and go, oh, you're suffering with depression. Okay. And the doctor can only diagnose and support you as much as you are able to share about your life. And I know that you want to move on to some of the more chronic states or experiences of the mental state of wellness. But if in the future we are not giving these conversations where people know, I don't need to go and see a psychologist, number one, to get another label, number one, for the psychologist to fix my problem, because that's not going to happen. You need to fix your own problem. The psychologist will work with you if you are in a safe place, and they will give you the coping skills to go back out there and function. But it doesn't need to be a lifetime sentence. You don't need to see a psychologist for these short interventions, and there is nothing wrong with seeking that help. And again, I go back to the practical experience. We're very quick to go to the doctor because we've got a headache. We're very quick to run to the pharmacy. Please help me. My stomach is sore. These are signs of potentially underlying mental issues. So maybe start to integrate therapy into that process of recovery, because it's so supportive and it's so real.
Thank you, Tracy. So Tobisa's got a very pertinent question here. She's saying, if your mental health has led to the loss of employment before, how can you let your future employee or recruiter know without sabotaging your chances of being employed? Do one of you want to take that question quite briefly?
Tracy, maybe you can speak from the work perspective. All I can do is maybe just reflect is that there is, one way of linking with what Tracy said is it's more responsible to be upfront. And maybe what you can do is you're connecting with, you've got psychologists, but the occupational therapists play a major role here as well. So maybe what you could do is you could work with your psychologist, but also occupational therapists that can help you to reintroduce into the workplace. Because people that have been temporarily boarded at times for mental well-being, that's what we do. We reintroduce them into the workplace with the occupational therapist and the psychologist, because that's how you support them to get back there. But you have to work with the employer. I do know that people are anxious often because I don't want to tell people that I've struggled before. But my concern is if you're not going to own your truth, you're not dealing with your reality. And then what often happens, that you're going to hit the pothole.
Yeah. I think
Thanks,
that's
Paddy.
true.
And you know what I'd like to suggest before we move on to the next question is that if you're exercising and training, it's a journey, right? And the more you apply yourself to it, the fitter you're going to get. Mental agility is also a muscle, and it also requires training. And, to a point you made, seeking the assistance of a counselor or psychologist can become part of your normal lifestyle. It can be a routine check-in that you do with a coach. I mean, in business, we talk about business coaches or executive coaches. Why not invest in a life coach? Because as much as you exercise the physical muscles, you've got to also exercise that mental muscle, because the more in sync the two are, the more optimized your performance is. So that leads me on to, we've spoken about people who are at the heart of this conversation. We've spoken about performance in the business context. Paddy, I want to pick up on wellness, purpose, and passion. So during October Mental Health Month, before South Africa launched the Gazette, I had put my hand up very spontaneously to do a 710K cycle run walk challenge in 30 days. And that's purely because the racing strategist at McLaren, Randy Singh, was going to do the same in the UK for Mind. It was a thing called Move for Mind. And I said, look, Randy, I'll do it with you in South Africa, but I want to support a South African organization. So that's how I came across SADAG. And Paddy, I always wondered how on earth you wake up at 4:30 every single morning for 10 years and more on trot. And something said to me, I'm sure she has a purpose. So talk to us, Paddy, around wellness and how that's different slightly to mental health, and how purpose-driven lives and business principles can almost pull you into a thrive mindset as opposed to a survive mindset. And I'm leading the question a little bit, but I do want to give our listeners some hope.
You know, if I look at the history of psychology, initially we studied mental illness. That's where we started. So people were studied in psychiatric hospitals. But we have evolved from that. Wellness is about being the best version of yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, in an employment setup. That's where we want to go. So our aim should not be to wait until we're not doing well. Our aim should be, how can I be happier? And happiness is often related, you know, if you look at man's search for meaning, when Viktor Frankl went to the concentration camp, he didn't have a choice. He looked around himself and he said, why do some of us live and why do others die? And he spent his life when he left the concentration camp trying to figure that out. And one of the answers he came to is that those who lived was because there was meaning in their life. And we have to have a reason to get up in the morning. Because if we don't have a reason to get up in the morning, that makes it hard. And often when you start off as a youngster, you are made to believe your reason should be to be successful, to be the best at something. As we start, and then we choose a career, but your career is not going to be fulfilling enough. Gradually, you're going to realize, I can do this, but now I want to be able to live a fuller life. And that's often where you start saying, I want to challenge myself. In our career world, we sometimes going to get to a place where you don't feel challenged anymore. But maybe you want to be, that's why people start cycling, people start running, start taking up other challenges, because you have an opportunity to feel, I can do something, I can grow and I can develop. But if we choose to do something, if you look at the research, if we look at happiness, we look at success, we look at Tracy spoke about resilience, we all do better if we challenge ourselves just beyond what we think is possible. Not too far, because you don't put yourself under too much stress. You put yourself under too much stress by putting the goal too high, then you're going to lose hope, like you said. But in the end, a lady who was a mother of social work, once said, motivation equals hope and discomfort. So for us to be motivated, we need to have some level of discomfort, but it must be balanced with hope. So a purpose-driven life, which means motivated to get up in the morning and live a life. We make the mistake of thinking we must remove discomfort. We must balance it with hope. Discomfort is good. It must just not turn into overwhelming discomfort, because that paralyzes us. But I think if we can remember that to be motivated, to have a purpose in life, don't aim to always, if you gain weight and you go and you just buy a bigger jean, then you're not going to deal with your weight issue. But if you keep that jeans and you work and you have hope that one day I'm going to fit back in that jeans, that's the balance with hope and discomfort. to stay motivated.
Thanks, Paddy, for framing that beautifully. And I can validate all that Paddy was saying, because yes, I did achieve that 710 Ks in 2 weeks. And in fact, I went to do 1,000. And that's really because I was encouraging those in my ecosystem to donate money to SADAG. And so I had absolutely abundant energy. And when I stopped that, I hit a flat spot. So Paddy, I absolutely can testify to what you're saying. Tracy and Paddy, I've shared with you that in 2011, a colleague of mine unfortunately took, their life unexpectedly. And that opened my eyes to what is unsaid in the workplace and how a person's total reality influences their ultimate decisions. And sometimes that reality can become so overwhelming that you feel you simply don't have the tools in life to cope. And when I heard the news, which was devastating to all of us, I shared with one of the executives that I hope that someone in this company feels that they have at least one person they can share their story with, so that we can try and do something. So it's quite a heavy subject, but Tracy, I want to just ask you, what are the indications of suicide? And when we see such indications, what should we do, being the observer who often feels that we're not able to help?
Right. Thanks for that question. And I think as much as, yes, we tend to think it's a uncomfortable topic, it's not a word that we should be talking about. Unfortunately, the reality is that we need to talk about suicide. South African statistics are in excess of 23 suicides a day, and I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. But worse than that is, per day, we are seeing 460 plus attempted suicides. Now, the harsh reality of that is that that person in a moment really felt down. They had no hope. And they decided to attempt to end their life. It didn't work. Sadly, a lot of those people would have been mishandled because there is not adequate medical care in this country to handle those volumes. And so what happens is a lot of those people would have received physical care. For example, the doctor stitched them up. They had to have their stomach pumped. They had to drink charcoal to clear themselves from the overdose. But then they never got therapy. And so I think what we need to do, and particularly in the workplace, is be very in touch, in tune to the words that our staff, our employees are saying. The reality is that we will miss some of the signs and symptoms. And Roshni, as much as you share personal experience, I too have lost a loved one to suicide. And I was the last person that person spoke to. And all they said to me is, but Tracy, why are you so kind? Why are you always trying to help me? And I did. I had a period of my life where I did. I kind of had the flashback. Why didn't I see it? So I think we need to be kind and understand that we cannot save everybody. Ending your life is a choice. But in the workplace environment, we cannot afford to push our staff and employees to the limit where, due to whatever reason, they don't see any hope and they are not able to connect and talk to somebody. I think the most important thing, and especially in the workplace platform, if a colleague, a friend, a loved one, a supervisor, anybody comes to you and says, my life is over, I can't carry on like this anymore, you, the person they have approached, are not expected to jump into therapy, give them the answers. The gift I give you this evening is share the SADAG website. Tell them to phone 0800 567 567. It is our national suicide crisis line in this country. and there will always be a counsellor to talk to them. What you can say to this person is, I cannot begin to understand the pain, the darkness you are feeling right now. But what I will do is I will walk the journey of getting you help. I will take your hand and stick through that. And as quick as possible, you need to get that person into the medical structure of support and help. And when I talk about that, hospitals, clinics, doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, and counselors and social workers. So there is a network of help. And we need to not be scared about talking about this very real subject.
Thanks very much for giving us that practical advice, and also for circling back to the organization that we're acknowledging this evening, and that is SADAG. So thank you to them for some fantastic work that they're doing on a voluntary basis. Paddy, can I ask you if there are any closing comments from your side before we wrap up for the evening? Paddy, you're on mute.
Okay. Tracy used the word kind. You cannot be kind to others if you're not kind to yourself. No one is perfect, and this has been tough. And sometimes you just need to embrace it. You just need to remember that when it's hard, and if you acknowledge it, deal with it, because sometimes when we walk around and we feel, especially what I've seen a lot with lockdown is because of lockdown, literally people have gone inward, and you think your reality is everybody's reality. Everyone's reality is different. People have different challenges, but all of those challenges are valid. So start with kindness towards self, but also just remember that the other person might be struggling too. Their life is different from yours, but they might have different challenges. But let's be kind to self and others.
Wow, what a powerful conversation, ladies. And I feel like we've just touched the surface on things that may require to be unpacked. And hopefully the organizations who are listening in on this conversation now or the recorded version will give some thought to the nuggets that you've shared, Paddy and Tracy. And if at any time, these organizations want to take up the conversation and further explore the best possible interventions, then there certainly are coaches, facilitators, and consultants that you may be able to speak with. Listeners, thank you very much for giving up your evening. We had a late start due to Paddy and Tracy's heavy schedules, but we have run about 2 minutes over time, and I'm going to wrap up quite quickly. So, being a leader or an entrepreneur is hardly a carefree and glamorous role. It is a choice of taking a less traveled path of uncertainty and risk in pursuit of a bigger purpose. We are all leaders in some areas of our life, most importantly of our self-mastery. The journey of business and life required us tremendous mental strength and emotional resilience to fully appreciate the experience. When out of balance, we cannot perform optimally, feel fulfilled, and sustain success. So I hope that this conversation tonight has offered some useful nuggets that enable you to better understand mental health, which requires nurturing, exercise, and of course, as Paddy said, compassion. Thank you very much to you ladies for your time this evening and for sharing your knowledge. Thank you to Theo Camberos and IT Tech, the trusted IT guy, for the technical assistance to host and record this webinar for us. Thank you too to Flowers by Lee for adding a soft and gentle touch to our sometimes hard conversations. So we will see you all again in 2021 for a new schedule of strategic conversations for agile leaders and forward thinkers. Stay posted to our webpage, LinkedIn, and Facebook pages for details. As I said, you can contact us at StratAstute Consulting to discuss how we can help you shape and steer your business growth and sustainability. And in the meantime, do take care of yourselves physically, mentally, and emotionally, because the opportunity to thrive is a right and a gift that is available to every human being. Remember that. As a society, we are always stronger together. So lift others as you rise or as you thrive. Take care. Bye-bye.